This is the Soviet Tair 11. Its 20 aperture blades put it in the bokeh monster category. But is it all that? Or is it just a one-trick pony? We're going to talk about that and more in this edition of Click Click Comrade.
Добрый вечер.
Здравствуйте, товарищи.
This is a Soviet Tair 11 lens. It's a 135mm lens, and this particular one was made in probably 57 or 58 from the KMZ factory. I figured that if the judges of the 1958 Brussels World's Fair like it, then it's got to be a good piece of kit, right? Well, it's not. Well, it is and it's not. We're going to discuss. So let's get to the specs and a brief overview out of the way first. The original calculations were made by none other than D.S. Volosov in 1951. Engineering on the Tair 11 began in 1955 and production prototypes began to appear in 1958. Full-scale production of the Tair 11 started in 1960 and ended in 1995 with the Tair 11A, which I don't have one of. The first iterations, like this one, had an M39 mount with a flange distance of 42.5 millimeters and a focal length of 133.2 millimeters. And that flange distance means no infinity focus, which limits this lens's potential for landscapes. The subsequent Tair 11-2 was an M42 mount. It had a 45.5 millimeter flange distance and a 135 millimeter focal range, which kind of puts it more in line with modern lenses. It's commonly understood that this lens was named after the star Altair, which would make sense considering the Soviet Union's penchant for space-related names, i.e. Helios, Jupiter, Vega, etc. I've also read that it was named after a lake in a wilderness region of south-central Russia. I've no idea, I'm just putting it out there. If you do know, please let me know down in the comments. So this lens and Volosov's Mir 1 lens were part of the Soviet Union's presentation at the 1958 Brussels World's Fair. That presentation won the Grand Prix prize, and the Soviets were very proud of that. So proud, in fact, they printed it on most of the Tair 11s and Mir 1s that were produced after that. Generally, the first two digits of a lens's serial number refer to its build date, but you'll notice that the serial number of this lens starts with a 0. The 0 in my serial number probably means that this lens was meant for a higher up in the factory, perhaps a VIP party member, or might even be a prototype version of the lens. It's also believed that lenses with zeros at the beginning of the serial numbers reflect higher build quality and or materials, which may or may not be true. The Tair 11 is pretty well built, and some 60 years later, you can feel it simply by holding the lens in your hand. However, this rattle, or Luft, as it is known, is pretty common amongst Tair 11 owners, at least M39 Tair 11 owners. This hunk of metal contains 4 elements in 3 groups and weighs in at about 560 grams. Dimension-wise, it's about 4.5 inches tall and almost 3 inches wide. I read that the focus throw was, I think, 330 degrees. It's very long, but that helps when trying to dial in an image to be as sharp as possible. The lauded feature of this lens is that it has 20 aperture blades. Oof, check those blades out. Just looks so cool. Those 20 aperture blades ensure perfectly round bokeh throughout the entire f-stop range. More often than not, I've discovered oil on the aperture blades of most Tair 11s. So if you're looking at one on eBay or for sale, make sure to check that out. What it can do is that oil can micronize long term and form a kind of coating on your lenses that you just don't want to deal with. Like most Soviet lenses of the era, this one has a preset aperture ring. And this one goes from f2.8 all the way to f22. Now, f2.8 is not particularly fast for a portrait lens, but you have to remember, this was in the late 50s. This is a very fast lens for its day. The clickless aperture means that adjusting exposure on this lens can be done subtly. Again, amazing for video. The clear strength of this lens is separation of its subject from the background. If you've got a very specific application for this characteristic, then this lens is definitely for you. It's also a fine lens stopped down for medium shots. But Are you going to be shooting sunsets with this? Probably not. The resolution on this lens is 39 by 32 by 26 lines per millimeter. So it's not a super crispy, crazy sharp lens, but I think that's the point. Chromatic aberration leans to green, but like the slight pin cushioning of this lens, it's easy to correct this in post. The lens's softness really complements skin tones, which I suspect is why it's known as a portrait lens. And I find it sharp enough in most circumstances, with infinity focus being the exception. Now, the Tair 11A has an M42 mount, infinity focus, and a slightly higher resolution, but I don't have one. So we're going to only talk about this one. The 11A is a pretty decent lens in its own right. This one is owned by Mark Holtz.
Hi all, my name is Mark, and
he has an amazing YouTube channel that I've learned a lot from. You can check out his videos here, and there's a link in the description. Thank you so much again, Mark, for letting me use this footage. The minimum focus distance for the Tair 11 is 1.5 meters, which is slightly shorter than former Premier Khrushchev. However, we will not be measuring the minimum focus distance in Khrushchevs for this video. I was super eager to get out and start using this lens, and I picked a great day for it. The sun was shining, nobody was around, and I was able to start capturing stuff. But I kept running into the same problem.
Just so close, huh?
Everything that I pointed this lens at seemed to be a little bit too close to me. I just wasn't really used to using this lens, and it's not in my comfort zone.
I am too close to this thing. This lens keeps pushing me back. I love it.
I started to have a good time once I got used to the fact that this lens was so telescopic.
This 135 will take some getting used to.
So, focal length aside, I thought this lens performed very well. Colors are vivid, with lots of contrast, as long as you manage the incoming light. A lens hood will definitely help with this very common issue across most Soviet lenses of this era. Once I started to get into the flow of things and got used to the lens, the photos started flowing.
I feel acutely aware that I'm probably trespassing.
While I wasn't running from security dogs, I was trying to use the focal length to my advantage. You know, this is a very big lens, but it didn't seem very heavy at all. It wasn't unwieldy. I never got tired or fatigued. It was very easy to use.
That's kind of cool. Iowa bad boys. Who knew there was such a thing?
As I just mentioned, it's very easy to achieve separation of the subject, especially when you're wide open. You've actually got to be careful not to overdo the amount of blur, as this lens will completely remove all context from your shot. Conversely, if you've ever wanted to turn your background into an abstract watercolor, this might be your lens. All of the same great characteristics that were present on the lens for photos were there for videos. Deep color straight out of camera. Better than average contrast. The lens was certainly sharp enough, but the things that took me out of my comfort zone for photos also existed for video.
The 135 does have some reach.
It took me a little bit of time to get used to that, but again, just like photos, once I was able to get used to it, it worked out well. I found the middle of the focal range was very wide, so I didn't have to refocus a lot at medium range. This is a really nice feature because adjusting focus is a long process on this lens. This is definitely not a sports lens, unless the former chairman of the Council of the People's Commissars of the Soviet Union wants to shoot a few hoops. Then it's absolutely a sports lens. So, does the focal length and lack of infinity focus make this lens a one-trick pony? Well, I kept pondering that question literally for weeks. And in my research, I found that a very famous Russian submarine commander had already solved this problem for me. We needed to get closer, get closer, get closer, get closer, get closer.
You're heading straight into that torpedo. Yes.
Okay, he's Scottish-Russian. I know that the idea of getting closer with a lens that already has an awful minimum focus distance seems counterintuitive. So I needed to test things out. The actual minimum focus distance of my lens was almost 47.5 inches. I then used a helicoidal adapter to get closer to my subject.
Red October's turned directly into the torpedo's path, sir.
Mother of God.
Now, extending the focal plane magnifies the image on the sensor, which creates a closer minimum focus distance.
Combat tactics, Mr. Ryan.
So
that's it?
yeah, that's it. And that's it. My name is Eric, and this has been Click Click Comrade. Thank you very much. Thank you again to Mark Holtz. His link is down in the description. If you like the video and you found it useful, then go ahead and click like and subscribe to be notified when I'm going to make new videos. It takes me a little bit of time to make these videos, but I enjoy making them, and they will keep coming as long as you keep liking them. That wraps it up from this end. Thank you very much, and keep clicking.